Good day, everyone. Welcome here to Libertarian Currents. This is a series of videos where we're going to meet with Jacques Boudreau, leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, and talk about current events. Hi, Jacques. How are you doing today?
Very well, David. And you?
Excellent. So we posted a video yesterday at YouTube, and we have a comment from Mr. Michael Emerson. I thought I'd read that out loud. It's nice to see some engagement. He says, well, I don't agree with all of the policies of the Libertarian Party. I have a lot of respect for them, and I definitely want to vote for them. I think that they are the only party that wants to establish the right to bear arms into our Constitution, so I am definitely voting for them. Thank you, Michael. Anything to add to that, Jacques?
Well, I would like to thank Michael for his support. I would also say that I applaud somebody who is willing to vote for a party without having sort of a negative approach to things. That is, people too often, in my opinion, will simply zero in on a policy that they disagree with, and therefore I cannot vote for this party type thing. I think what Michael is doing here is that on average, or in aggregate, I should say, he thinks that our policies are good. Again, doesn't agree with all of them, which is fine. But, you know, in aggregate, decides that we're the best party. So, yeah, thank you for your support, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Now, for the audience here, Jacques and I spoke a little earlier before coming online, and we decided that he would like to talk about a new bill that's being discussed in Parliament. I'm just going to bring that information on screen and then just pass the mic over to you, Jacques. This is the bill C-63, commonly known as the Online Harms Act, and I'll bring it on screen so that everyone can see. And I guess over to you.
Yeah, this is very scary bill on a number of fronts. Let me begin with, and this is something that I find to be an ongoing problem when people argue about these things, is that we will move straight to the conclusion and possibly say disagree with the conclusion, when in fact I think it would be much better if we went to the premises first. So in this case, right, the government would argue that hate speech is a problem. However, my understanding is that this is very, very poorly defined, such that a party in power, could decide to label as hate speech, say, criticism of the government, which of course would be a terrible, terrible thing. So I think it would be much, much better if we went back to the, say, first premise and agree on what constitute hate speech. And this is where I think a conversation could go on for quite a while, because it's very clear to me that my definition of hate speech is drastically different from that of the liberals. I know that the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, said that in Trudeau's mind, hate speech is a speech that he hates. And I think there's a big element of that is quite true. Now, from a libertarian point of view, hate speech, the threshold is quite high, and it's basically when you start encouraging physical harm on others, that is hate speech. Anything below that is not hate speech. And it's very clear now that we live in, there's a segment of society that believes very strongly that it is a human right to go through life without ever being offended. This is, of course, complete nonsense, because notice that one thing that they do is to apply this to themselves, but they don't apply it to others. So, for example, I do find that Trudeau offends me on a regular basis. And yet, as a libertarian, I would actually defend very strenuously his right to offend me, right? As opposed to people who say, you cannot say anything about anything if it offends me. This is, to me, is a non-starter. And we have to push back. If that's the basis upon which the Liberals have built this bill, we have to push back and agree that that threshold is far, far too low, because then anything goes. Another problem with this bill is that we don't really know, never mind what I just said, who is going to define what hate speech is and who's going to be the arbitrator. I also find it very problematic, and this is something that we see quite commonly now, is where the government has decided to deputize private companies for basically doing their work. And when I say it's commonplace, I mean, consider that, for example, when it comes to money laundering, the government has deputized banks and insurance companies for basically doing their work. This strikes me as extremely bizarre, because you basically ask companies to do things without, say, compensation, or to me, that it's quasi-slavery to say you must do this and you're going to go to jail if you don't report things to us. Well, surely the government, I mean, could demand, for example, that transactions be passed on to them and then they can do the work, as opposed to downloading this upon private companies. And it's the same thing here, right? I think they would threaten all kinds of terrible things to private companies that don't take down what they deem to be hate speech, again, without defining it properly. And the fact that they would enable now the Canadian Human Rights to come after people, I mean, there are many, many flaws with that one, particularly since they don't operate the same way as, say, the legal code, in the sense that your accuser can remain hidden. They quite often, they don't have to pay for well, in a way, sort of suing you. So there's a lot of things that are very, very bad with this. But going back again to what I think is the biggest flaw is premise one, which is that you can basically name whatever you want as things that you don't like. And I mean, in the hand of any government is dangerous, but it's particularly dangerous in the hands of the Liberals, who I think in the past have made it very clear that indeed hate speech is thing that they don't really agree with, which, I mean, that's, like some people have said, that if there is one right that we need to defend more than anything else, it is free speech, because that's the one that we can use to defend other rights that might have been taken away from us, like where you need to be able to push back. So yeah, this, I think, is a terrible, terrible piece of legislation, and everybody should be fighting against it.
Jacques, I want to interrupt and just ask, I think some of the argument might be that there's harm being done to children, for example, exploitation of children, content that's difficult or inappropriate at certain ages. And what would you say to those who suggest that this act is necessary in order to protect those or that? And part of my question is, do we not already have laws that attempt to protect children from exploitation or illegal content, the publication and distribution of illegal content? Do we not already have such laws? What do you think is the reason for this new act?
So the answer to your first question is yes. My understanding is that we have laws in place that protect, for example, laws against child pornography. That's part of the criminal code. If you're caught, having downloaded some, I mean, you can go to jail, as you should. So it exists already. Similarly, we have in the criminal code elements that touched upon what I said before, right? Like if you come out and you encourage the killing of certain groups, of certain individuals, I mean, you could go to jail for that, again, as you should. So these things exist already. Now, as for your second question, as to why, let me bring, as an example, I find that the liberals, for the most part, are very poorly educated, poorly read people who don't. To me, it's like they are um, madly trying to grasp at things to make it work without being principle based. So let me give you an example, because I do find some parallels. Most economists agree that if you're going to do anything to try to reduce the consumption of carbon-based products, that a carbon tax is the most efficient way, because you basically have a market mechanism at play that deals with that. And the theory was that if you do that, you ought to be able to do away with all of the other measures that are often used. Production caps, uh, um, things like social credits, or all of these different things that people would want to use. The idea again is, if you have a carbon tax, then you can do away with all the other ones. But the liberals, again, and I don't understand at all, other than this kind of madly trying to grasp, but they do the carbon tax, but they have production caps, right? I mean, they want to introduce maximum production on many companies in Alberta, for example. They would be toying with the idea of a social credit, in terms of, like if you travel too much. They are continuing to muddle the waters, to add things that, again, in theory, are not necessary. So similarly here, it would be interesting to talk to them and ask them, what do you think is flawed in the current legislation? That, like, is it because you think the threshold, as I mentioned before, is too high and you want to bring it down? Well, again, let's discuss this threshold, because it's crucially important. If you believe that people are indeed allowed to go through life without ever being offended, then you have a problem, because I could now try to bring Trudeau to court because he offends me daily. So they cannot claim sort of these one-sided argument, which is, I can't be offended, but I can offend the heck out of you. So like, of course, it's very difficult for me to answer your second question, other than to point out that there are other elements where they're all over the place, and not satisfied to deal with things that are understood to be the best way forward.
I think the point you've just made is important, that this act, should it pass through Parliament and become law, is cumulative. It adds to the other measures that are already in place to protect people from such harms, exploitation of children online, or pornographic content, these kinds of things. Is there anything else? Well, I like that you earlier, perhaps
let me add, because
Yeah.
this is something I read not too long ago. Again, just how absurd the whole thing is, right? As you know, this government is very, very keen to bring in Islamophobia on a regular basis, right?
Mhm.
Now, there are members of the Muslim community who, like, I'm quoting them, like it's not like I know a great deal, but these are people who would be described as, say, moderate, and they claim that Islam, just like Judaism and Christianity, needs to have a sort of a reform element, which they've never had, they claim, right? So these are people who would say, there are things right now that we need to reform within Islam. And these people, when they see a bill like this, are petrified, because they think that any criticism of the way it exists right now could be perceived like that I say maybe a more extremist element would actually now come out after these people and say, you see, like you may be a Muslim, but your speech is full of Islamophobia type thing, right? So it would prevent what seemed to me to be a pretty legitimate element to explore. So this is the very chilling effect of a bill like this, is that even genuine seeking of improvement could be silenced by people threatening you to, with contravening the law or suing you or what have you. So
I think that there's precedent for that too, where let's say the most, like the example you've just given is where the most extreme faction of a set of ideas will be the group that defines what is offensive. They'll say this is offensive to us, and therefore this law could be applied to everyone else, even within that faction. I hadn't thought of it that way that you just described, but it does mean that there's risk, even among practicing Muslims or of any other faith, is risk among those groups to debate.
yeah, I mean it's the surest way to shut down any. Well, I mean, let's take another example, right? This whole trans movement, or but the situation is going on at the moment. I mean, if one listens to Danielle Smith in Alberta and what she proposes, that there are people who are accusing her of genocidal, a law, right? Now, and by the way, I should say, people ought to be careful when they want to start changing the definition of terms. They really risk watering it down so much as to render the term itself sort of meaningless. So let me put it this way. If it is hateful for me to advocate the death of somebody, but it is equally hateful for me to say, you know what, maybe those moderate Muslims are onto something, right? If you equate the two of them as being, both of them are hateful, I think that you now have this very, very serious problem, because now what does the term hate means, right? It can be absolutely to one extreme where you advocate death for people, and one where you simply want to explore different ideas. It's very, very it's very, very scary when we see the manipulation or the change in the definition of terms.
I wonder if it's possible, under the current language of this bill, that even Danielle Smith, who is an elected premier in a province, would be brought before a human rights commission.
Well, I think it would certainly be easy for someone to bring it. Now, whether
to make that argument.
Oh yeah.
Now, whether the argument would grow legs or not, we can't predict.
No, and again, I think it speaks to the weakness of the bill that we don't know whether something like that would happen. But again, to me, maybe it's always been like this, but it just seems to me that a lot of people are either unwilling or incapable of arguing an idea that a lot of people simply, the knee-jerk reaction is to slur people, right? You want to commit genocide. Well, again, who the heck wants to be associated, right? Who wants to be told that, they're racist or white supremacist? Or, I mean, nobody that I know would like that. So unfortunately, there's a lot of self-silencing going on because, people don't, again, they don't want to be labeled that way. But I can't stand that. Like, we ought to be able to discuss things, to argue them, as opposed to, again, right? If the first reaction is to slur people, and it's very unfortunate that we have a prime minister who I think in many ways has enshrined that type of behavior, because very, very seldom do you ever hear him defend his ideas or to expose somebody else's ideas with facts and logic, right? Like, his knee-jerk reaction is always to slur people, right? Unacceptable ideas, fringe people, right? Like, these are all slurs. And
A
my
rise,
question to him would be, why can't you argue your position, right? And demonstrate why somebody else is incorrect, as opposed to simply labeling them.
yeah, a rise of identity politics, and we've certainly
Yeah.
seen that in Canada.
Yeah.
Maybe, Jacques, let me ask, in a world where the Libertarian Party was able to influence Parliament to a greater degree, or even form government, this bill C-63, I get a sense, wouldn't even exist. This would not be a bill that would come to the floor from a Libertarian Party. So what would a Libertarian Party do to, if the premise of this bill is to protect children from exploitation online, protect identifiable groups from hate, what would a Libertarian Party do instead?
Well, of course, we would not support this bill. The bill would not come to see the light of day. And I think we are quite satisfied with the existing elements of the criminal code that deal with this, right? Child pornography is a criminal act. Threatening or encouraging the killing of other people is a criminal offense. I think we don't see any reason to add things to what exists already.
Would you agree or not that that law enforcement agencies have enough resources to act on the current laws in the criminal code with this regard? Or would a Libertarian Party increase funding to such agencies?
I firmly believe that, and again, this is a very typical libertarian point of view, there are a number of things right now that are using police force that are made up crime. So by made up, what I mean is things that are victimless, but where, and again, this is an age-old problem. People get into power and they immediately criminalize things that they don't like. Right? As a libertarian, there are a lot of things that people do that I don't like, but it's not, as long as they respect other people's freedom and, don't do harm to others, they can do whatever they want, even though I don't like it. Right? And that's a big, big difference between libertarians and other parties. Other parties, they always try to find some justification as to why they should interfere into people's lives. So, as a result of which, again, we have all kinds of things on the books that are illegal or even criminal in some cases, even though they don't do any harm to anybody other than the person doing it themselves. So, for example, we have, until recently, made it illegal to consume marijuana. And, the party has advocated for years that it should be made legal. Well, it is now legal. But for decades, imagine the amount of resources, police resources, that were spent on a victimless crime. Now, again, there are other ones, but A libertarian government, of course, would stop that and reallocate resources to true crime. I also believe, and would be from a minarchist point of view, because again, within the libertarian element, that there are anarcho-capitalists who would have essentially zero government. There are others who would argue for a minarchist position, which is a very, very small government that would handle, for example, the protection of its citizens against harm. Okay, so police force, judiciary. My comment here will be based on a minarchist position, simply because I think it's one that most libertarians are comfortable with. I would say that even anarcho-capitalists would be happy to move to a minarchist position, and you'll see how it goes from there. But anyway, we do, well, again, the minarchist position would be that the one role of the government is to protect its citizens. So if that's the case, imagine the enormous amount of resources right now that are going towards things that have nothing to do with that. All the central planning, all the corporate subsidies, all of the help to, well, all kinds of different, special interest groups, whether it's arts or artists or, like this sort of, the minutia they get into in terms of, like here's 10 million here, or sending money abroad. I mean, there's just enormous amounts of money that a Libertarian Party would take away and then reallocate. And I'm not saying it would be all of it, but certainly reallocate to law enforcement to go after real harm. So, sorry, it was a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think that there's all kinds of stuff that the Libertarian government would not get involved in and actually spend more time or more money on the things that where there's a much better justification for the existence of the government. Like a good example is national defense. The state of national defense, like of the Canadian Armed Forces, it's an absolute shambles, right? And what's the purpose of that? Well, it is to be able to protect the country against an invasion, for example, right? If we look at what happened to Ukraine, I mean, who's to stop the Russians from invading our north? We are absolutely incapable of defending. I don't find that to be remotely acceptable. But again, the liberal playbook on this is that apparently national defense has no traction, and therefore they won't do it. But there's a real element here where we have basically banked on the U.S. to provide the security for us out of a vested interest that they have, of course, in not seeing Canada invaded. But I think it is a despicable approach to you're basically like a deadbeat dad, right? You're not making your payment and you're hoping that somebody else is going to step in. So
that's a good point. The resources that are currently directed at stopping mean tweets instead of directing those resources to the protection of our borders from other potentially hostile countries. Jacques, what do you think is the future of this bill? Like, I guess part of the question I'm asking is, do you think the Liberal Party is actually just making hay here and playing politics to put the Conservative Party into an awkward position where the Conservative Party has to vote against this, and then the Conservative Party can be blamed for not protecting children or something? Is that what's going on, or do you think Justin Trudeau truly wants these laws and then would enact them? I'll stop there, and then I have a follow-up question.
My guess is that the Liberals are governed by one principle and one principle only, and it's to try to win elections or to retain power. So with that, otherwise, I don't see any principles at all governing them. So to answer your question is that if they think that this is going to be somehow embarrassing for the Conservatives, then that's probably why they're doing it. Having said that, I was looking at a poll in the US recently, and that the numbers would be a little bit different in this country would not surprise me, but I don't think they would be by orders of magnitude. Anyway, this survey indicated that only 8% of Americans support the woke agenda. 8%. Now, people listening to this would say, my goodness, if it's only 8%, why is it all over the place? And I think the answer to that is that there's a disproportionate number of people in the media and academics where the percentage would be much greater than 8%. But I think the common people out there, the vast, vast majority of people have no time at all for it. And I think the liberals are terribly misreading what I would refer to as the silent majority. I think there's a lot of people who totally disagree with the woke agenda and these types of bills. Again, for fear of being demonized, which is very common, and we discussed that, will not say so publicly, but in a poll or in the voting booth, will certainly take it out on the government that's trying to impose this. And let me finish as an aside. The problem, as I see it, is that there's, how can I put this? There's like if a government is is trying to push things that don't matter on a daily basis to people, right? I mean, many Canadians are hurting right now. They're hurting in their wallet, inability to buy a home. These have all been very, very well publicized. Those are the sort of daily issues that people struggle with. I think that we are about to enter a recession. I think it's going to be a very bad one. I think that this bill is going to be very, very low in terms of priority for the common folk. And, if we are just coming out of a recession in the next election, rightly or wrongly, people take it out on the incumbent. So I think the Liberals are going to be punished severely in the next election because, again, they don't seem to care about the economy.
Polling will support your argument there, but we'll see how that pans out in the next year and a half. My follow-up question was, let's imagine that this bill becomes law. What do you think is the future for it? Could it be repealed in future? How easy is it for a government, if the Libertarian government were to, again, have more influence or in fact form government, could the party unravel this and repeal all of it and undo this act and all of its tentacles in the other laws and so forth?
I think the example of Javier Milei in Argentina is showing that people in general tend to be far too reluctant to repeal things. I mean, he has taken a chainsaw to a lot of things, and it's paying dividends already. I mean, it balanced a book for the first time in 12 years. The economy is doing much, much better. It's interesting that one of the things he did was to repeal some form of laws that was, again, as usual on the part of the government, was actually stopping people from coming to market with accommodations. And the number of apartments literally doubled in the span of a few weeks after he repealed the law. And of course, when you double the supply, guess what happened to prices? They tumbled down, which was a win-win for everybody. So, we would repeal it. I would have no hesitation at all. From a more pragmatic point of view, the question will be, what will the Conservatives do if they win the election next year? To me, that's the big question mark. I mean, I have to admit, Pierre Poilievre speaks a good game. When he says he wants to make the government, Canada, the freest country in the world. Now, it's not a very high threshold because there are not a lot of countries that are totally free. I suspect his threshold is much lower than mine. What he would call, very free, I don't think would be the case. But having said that, would he actually come to market to power and repeal the law? One can only hope. But I think it's a lot easier said. It's a lot easier done than people think it is.
Jacques, it's been a really great conversation. My earbuds are telling me that the battery is about to die. How about we wrap it up here?
All right. I don't think there's a lot more to say about this, although we will see.
We will see
how it evolves.
So thanks for that. I enjoy the conversation always. And for those of you watching, subscribe. Please share it across your own social networks, and look for future episodes of this series, the Libertarian Currents, where Jacques will react to current events, and another series called Libertarian Lens, where we will explore libertarian policy ideas and philosophy and guest speakers. Thanks very much for watching. Jacques, over to you.
Well, thank you, David. This was great. And again, let me add my voice to yours and hope that people will tune in on a regular basis.
Thanks, everyone.